We know exercise is good, but how much? How much of what? I'm really tired of just hearing, hey, you need to exercise, it's good for longevity. No, I'm a literal guy. Tell me what I need to know, right? We know based on literature that VO2 max is good. Having a higher VO2 max is a predictive indicator of just better longevity. Okay, great. Now what do I do with that? So what I've compiled here is based on robust scientific literature and not small scale stuff, big, large cohort data, the 5 biggest pieces of exercise that you should implement into your life if longevity is your goal. And also how much to do and how often to do it based on that same literature. We're gonna jump right in and I'm gonna make it as simple as possible because the data that we're looking at is complex. Longevity is complex. But the data is really simple when you distill it down to the basic quartiles and the basic facts. So let's go ahead and dive in. After today's video, I popped a link down below for LMNT electrolytes. That is a special link that gets you a free variety pack with any purchase. So it gets you a variety pack with their citrus salt, with their lemon habanero, with their mango chili, with their chocolate salt, and their unflavored. So you get that free variety pack with any purchase. These have very little, sometimes 0 calories depending on the flavor. Otherwise, you're talking 5 calories. So these things are totally okay if you're in a fasted state. They're not gonna add any caloric impact to your day. And there's 1,000 milligrams sodium, 200 milligrams potassium, and 60 milligrams magnesium. Highly recommend you check them out if you just want something to sip on that you feel like you're doing something good for your body and tastes delicious and pretty darn guilt-free. So the first best exercise that you can do for longevity is proper combination of high intensity interval training and continuous work. Now, what does that mean? Well, I'm gonna break it down exactly what you need to do. We know that a high VO2 max is critical for longevity. The American College of Cardiology had published a really big paper with over 5,100 people. And what they did is they divided people into quartiles of their VO2 max. So the bottom 5% of VO2 max, 5 to 50% bottom quartile, then 50 to 95% quartile, and the top 95 to 100% quartile of VO2 max. So best VO2 max all the way down to worst VO2 max. Here's what they found. They followed these people over the course of 46 years, and 4,700 people throughout this 46 years had died, and with that they were able to pull data. Compared to the bottom 5% of VO2 max, the second quartile lived 2.1 years longer. Compared to the bottom 5%, the third quartile lived 2.9 years longer. And compared to the bottom 5%, the top best VO2 max lived 4.9 years longer on average. When you're talking this much data, that is huge. That is why it is the single largest predictive indicator for longevity or all-cause mortality in this particular case. What we do know is that in order to train our VO2 max, we need to be training close to 90% of our maximum heart rate. That is difficult to do, right? It's hard. And that's not something that we all want to do, especially when it's ambiguous. Okay, you want me to potentially live longer, I need to do something terrible. Tell me exactly how long I need to do it so that I don't have to do it 1 iota longer than I need to. Well, with this, we look at a study that was published in PLOS 1 because it helped us understand the intervals and the continuous side, okay? And what they found is that when subjects did interval training for training their VO2 max, intervals ended up allowing them to increase their VO2 max by about 0.5 liters per minute. But when they did interval training that was a little bit longer, plus did the occasional continuous work, like continuous cardio, together, doing those both increased their VO2 max by 0.8 to 0.9 liters per minute, almost twice as much, even though the volume wasn't all that much more. So having a period of sustained intensity is really important for your VO2 max. So what we've seen in this literature based on the PLOS1 research is that doing your intervals a little bit longer, like 3 to 5 minutes, even though that's not traditional high intensity interval training, it's more like continuous interval training, that's really how you want to build your VO2 max. Think about like running 400 meter repeats or even 600 meter or 800 meter repeats. Horrible. Like the 800 meter is the worst race in the world. If you're a track person, you know. It's the worst. It's the most brutal, by far, at least for me. But that's the world you got to live in. Now, how much do you need to do? Well, other literature suggests that you don't even need 45 to 60 minutes of this kind of training per week. So that could add up to 4 times per week doing 3 rounds of intervals. That's it, 3 rounds of 3 to 5 minute intervals, a few times per week. That's what you need to increase your VO2 max to be into that top quartile to gain those potential 4.9 years based upon the American College of Cardiology research. It's pretty darn fascinating. So it kind of leads me into the next piece of this, which is the second one, but it's the dovetail, right? Running versus biking. Like, what's better? Like, here's where we have a little bit of a conundrum, because running, you're going to increase your VO2 max more. You're building more, you're using more, you're engaging more. You're gonna build more VO2 max that way. The hard part is, it's not necessarily sustainable. So biking, when you measure VO2 max, you measure it via 2 different ways. Like, you can measure it via bike ergometer or via running. Someone like myself that carries a lot of muscle mass, I'm probably going to achieve a better result on a bike than I would running, because like I'm not having to pump blood through my upper body, right? Now, if you were actually looking at watts per kilogram and things like that, like my peak power would probably be better running than it would be biking in a lot of ways. But that's irrelevant. What we have to look at here is that if you're actually trying to build VO2 max and you're not just looking at maximum power, you need to be able to get back and do it again. And if you were to go out and sprint to achieve your VO2 max, that's a lot of damage on your body. So will you get that VO2 max result higher? Yes. So if you're able-bodied and can run, that is a tremendous way to build your VO2 max. If you're a regular person, you should probably just hit the bike. You're gonna get the same effect. However, the literature isn't clear because VO2 max is correlative. Like, perhaps it's the fact that VO2 max is higher in people that run a lot too, and maybe they're moving their whole body and that has an impact on their all-cause mortality, but I digress. That's neither here nor there. So now we move into number 3, which is resistance training, but how much do we do it? Like, what the heck? We know we need to save our muscle, we need to eat protein, we need to that's all, we've all heard that a million times now. How much do we need to do? Well, there's a study that was published in BMJ. It took a look at 416,000 people. First of all, they ultimately determined that resistance training is not more or less, but as equally important as VO2 max when it comes down to potential longevity. They found in this paper that compared to 0 minutes of aerobic work, those that did 1 hour of aerobic exercise per week had a 15% reduction in all-cause mortality risk. And this increased significantly at 2 hours per week, all the way up to 3 hours per week, at which there was a line of diminishing return. So the upper output, I should say, for cardio seems to be 3 hours, okay? So we know that, but I'm talking about resistance training. So for 3 hours, you're getting the best bang for the buck, but that sweet spot might be more like an hour and a half to 2 hours of cardio. Here's where resistance training comes in. When resistance training was added 1 to 2 days per week, that is it. It increased this number, this decrease in all-cause mortality, an additional 11%. So 15% by doing your cardio plus an 11%, that's a 26% decrease in all-cause mortality risk by resistance training 1 to 2 days per week in addition to your cardio. I could not find literature suggesting resistance training without cardio. So some people say, well, resistance training is cardio. My heart rate gets up. No, it's not the same. We need to build that VO2 max. You're not training your VO2 max in the weight room unless you're doing Metcons or something. So you need to be doing 1 to 3 hours of cardio, and you need to be doing 1 to 2 days of full body strength training. That is your bare minimum. You can go up above that. That's neither here nor there. But there is another paper that actually looked at more with the resistance training, also published in BMJ, looking at 16 studies, a lot of data. They found that simply 30 to 60 minutes per week of resistance training decreased all-cause mortality, decreased cardiovascular disease, decreased cancer, and decreased diabetes. 30 to 60 minutes per week. So when I say 1 to 2 days of resistance training, we're talking a 30-minute bout on Tuesday, a 30-minute bout on Friday. That's it. Like, that's all you need to do. But you need to be training pretty hard. You need to be probably in that 8 to 12 repetition range. And yeah, you probably should be hurting a little bit, like not in painful ways, but you should be eliciting a burn. Anyhow, now let's move into the next one. Walking, the 10,000 steps thing. Is this actually real? because it doesn't have to do with our exercise or VO2 max component. So we say, well, if cardio is only important because VO2 max is the largest predictive indicator, then does walking even matter? Well, guess what? They looked at that too. This study was published in The Lancet, and it took a look at 15 studies, okay, looking at this whole 10,000 step thing, and it looked at 47,000 people. Huge study. And they divided them into different groups of who walked how many steps. The lowest quartile walked about 3,800 steps. The next quartile was about 5,800 steps per day. The lowest quartile walked about 3,500 steps per day. The second quartile walked about 5,800 steps per day. The third quartile walked on average 7,800 steps, and the highest quartile in this group walked 10,900 steps per day. Well, was it related with all-cause mortality at all? Compared to the lowest quartile, the group that was in the second quartile that walked 5,800 steps had a 40% reduction in all-cause mortality risk. The third group had a 45% reduction. And get ready for this, those that walked over 10,000 steps had a 53% improvement above the 3,800 step group. So the more steps you do walk, the lower the instance of, well, all-cause mortality. It's correlative because there's a number of different things. Those that are more active, maybe they also lift more. Those that walk more, maybe they also have better lives. Those that walk more, maybe they're outside more. But the point is, you change your odds by walking more. Because by walking more, maybe you're a happier person. By walking more, maybe you'll meet the love of your life that makes you a happy person. By walking more, you're passively getting a therapeutic effect. You get my point here. Walking is important. But one of the biggest reasons that walking is important is we're reducing sedentary time. There is literature that now suggests that if you can decrease your sitting time to less than 3 hours per day, you can literally add over 2 years onto your life. Now that is weak data too. It's strong but small, right? Or strong but just not that powerful. There's some data that proves even more powerful points there. I digress. The fifth thing, we never would have thought that yoga actually had a longevity play until we actually looked at some of these cardinal biomarkers, and this is fascinating. This study was published in Oxidative Medicine, and it took a look at 12 weeks of a yoga intervention, and they looked at various cardinal biomarkers. And what that means is they looked at things like DNA damaging like proteins, like genes that are elevated when there's DNA damage, so markers like that. They looked at antioxidant capacity. They looked at telomere length, which is associated with longevity. They looked at telomerase activity, the enzymes that protect our telomeres. They looked at interleukin-6, BDNF. They looked at all these different things. And what they found is that 12 weeks of yoga reduced inflammation, IL-6, increased BDNF, increased sirtuins, which if you pay attention to Dr. David Sinclair, very important as far as longevity is concerned. Also decreased the 8-OH2DG, which is the marker of DNA damage, in just 12 weeks. So maybe it's the stress relieving component, the meditative aspect of yoga, but it sounds like the perfect recipe here is walking 10,000 steps per day, doing higher intensity, longer intervals for 3 to 5 minutes, a few times per week, resistance training twice per week for 30 minutes minimum, and maybe doing yoga 1 to 2 times per week. It sounds pretty holistic, but it's also the most science-backed evidence that we have as far as exercise and longevity. I'll see you tomorrow.